Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about Ole Bruk. Have you ever heard the term Ole Bruk? That's a Jamaican term. Stay tuned. Hey guys, welcome to Memory Lane. Now, if you're happening on this channel for the first time, this is where I talk about childhood memories. Yeah, memories going back, way back into the early 60s and into the 70s and maybe touching the 80s a little bit, right? Yeah, so this is where I sit and I reminisce and I talk about the good old days and sometimes not, the not so good old days, if you know what I mean. All right, so today I want to talk about a situation that as kids growing up in humble beginning, let's call it humble beginnings, we had no choice but to take what we could get until we could get what we want. All right? Yeah, so back then as kids growing up in rural Jamaica, man, thinking about it then, we were poor. I would venture to say that, we were living in poverty sometimes. I would not say it was unique to my family or to me alone. Many of my neighbors around me, many people who lived in the village, or the community in general, were not wealthy people, did not have much, really humble beginnings, just basically living from hand to mouth many times, having to make do with what was available in terms of food and shelter, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so really humble beginnings. But I don't know, for me and my family, I thought we were exceptionally poor. A friend of mine told me that I should not say that because, it was kind of the norm back then. But for us who, for my family, let me give you a little bit of context. Most, back in I would say in the 50s and maybe early 60s, a lot of people migrated to the United Kingdom, England, to be more specific, and United States, right? England was open to immigrants, especially if you're from one of those British colonies. What I understood after the Second World War, England required a lot of labor, right? A lot of labor, skilled labor, but even unskilled labor. So, they turned to their, former colonies to supply some of these these labor shortages that existed around the time. A lot of people from the Caribbean moved to England in search of a better life, a more stable life. And if you have ever heard about there was this situation happening that was happening in England maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where a lot of immigrants were being deported unlawfully back to Jamaica and other Caribbean islands because they did not have the correct papers. What it was called again? I'm trying to remember the term that is used to describe these individuals. But the fact of the matter, a lot of people emigrated or migrated to England and the United States back in the mid-50s going into the 60s, right, in search of a better job. So most of my neighbors and many people in my community had children who moved to England in search of a better life, England especially, and North America, right? And these individuals from my village, my wider community, who had relatives living abroad. From time to time, and like I am doing now, my mom is living in Jamaica, and I have siblings there, and I would be, sending money via some kind of money transfer system to her, whether it be Western Union or whatever means necessary to help her financially, right? So many of my neighbors, many of them who were my grandparents' age and like that, they had their children in England or in the United States. So they were able to get money from these kids from time to time. But my family, we never had nobody abroad, no one abroad, right? We had no one to depend upon. I grew up with my grandmother, right? She was the sole. Well, my grandfather died when I was 10, and so my grandma became a widow from I was 10. And she was like the sole breadwinner of the family. There was 4 of us as grandkids living at the house. My mom was away in another part of the island trying to find a better life, and so was my another aunt of mine. So it was not uncommon then for you would see children being brought up by their grandmothers. All right? Okay. So the point is that my family, we barely had anything. We barely had food to eat sometimes. Food that you would buy from the shop or the supermarket. Sometimes we had nothing to eat. And in a time period like that, when things were so tough, and even today, I think the priority, or the 2 basic priorities of life, is food and shelter, right? Now we had shelter somewhat, and I'm using the word somewhat, but food was always how do you describe it? It was uncertain, if you know what I mean. It was uncertain. My grandma had to do all kind of odd jobs here and there just to put food on the table. And so clothing was not a priority, right? Clothing, food and shelter was a priority, but clothing was not a big priority. So as kids, we had to wear a pants until there were holes in it. Holes in the bum all over, shirt, the buttocks had holes in it, right? We may have had 1 or 2, and while one is washed and being dried, we would be wearing one. We would wear a pants and a shirt for the entire week before it was washed, right? But the situation that I want to bring to the forefront, the fact that we were so poor and never had much, and the fact that food and shelter was more of a priority. Clothing, we never had much clothing, right? And so many times we had to be, we were gifted a lot of hand-me-down stuff. Some of these stuff that barely fit. Some of these stuff we did not know where they originated. There was this lady who used to, she lived in the States, and she would come home every time around Christmas time, and she would pack barrels of stuff, and people would go there and buy. We didn't even have money to buy any of those clothing from her. And sometimes as a kid, I remember I would just drop by the house and just to see if she would have pity on me, just to give me a shirt or a pants. But back then, when somebody gave you something that you never knew where it originated from, or who was wearing it before you, or whatever the circumstances was, as to how that piece of clothing came about. We had two terminologies that we would either call it. We would either call it dead and left or Ole Bruk. Dead and left really means somebody died, and you're wearing somebody's what's the clothing that somebody died and left behind, right? So we call that one dead and left. Or Ole Bruk. Ole Bruk meaning that it was a kind of clothing where it was unwanted, probably something to be thrown in the dumpster, probably something that was picked up on the side of the street, or something that was undesirable, So when you were able to get a piece of Ole Bruk or a piece of dead and left, when I was able to get a piece of Ole Bruk back in the day, growing up as a kid, oh man, you felt as if you were in heaven, sometimes it was, some of these Ole Bruk, this kind of clothing I'm talking about that we would call Ole Bruk. We would get this piece of clothing, maybe a shirt or an old pants. We were happy, because, what was the alternative? It's either you wear the one pants you have, or the one pants you had, you sleep in it and you wake up in it, or whatever. It's either that or you take whatever you could get from whoever gave you whatever. So many times as a kid I would get clothing, man. I don't know who was wearing it or where it came from, or, under what circumstances these people got this clothing and gave it to us. Ole Bruk, man. A lot of Ole Bruk. And we had to wear them, because we never had much of a choice. Really? We never had nobody to help us financially. We never had anyone who could send, buy us clothing. My grandmother, she could not, life was tough. Let's just say life was challenging and life was tough back then for me. And regardless of what, anyone might say, I still look back at it as sometimes humble beginnings, very humble beginnings, but also a life of poverty too. Yeah, a life of poverty. We were poor. I am not going to mince my words. We were poor, right? Yeah. But anyway, not to bore you to death, what was life like back for you back in those days? If you're from that time and growing up in humble beginnings, humbler times, what was it like for you? How did your parents cope? What was it like not being able to, your parents not being able to provide for you as a kid back then? Tell me about it. Tell me about some of the clothing or maybe shoes or whatever that you had to wear. You never knew where they came from, they originated from, or whatever. But because you were in need, you had to wear these things. Tell me about it. All right? Anyway, don't forget to like this video if you found it, if it brought back some memories for you. If you like the kind of videos that I talk about here, the subject matters, going back down memory lane, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a beat. All right? So until we talk again, until the next video, my name is Source of Wood. Take care of yourself.